Annette Ross, host of Common Ground on the Sylvia Global Media Network. Today, it's my privilege to have Amy Richards, a feminist, activist, writer, organizer, and co-founder of the Third Wave Foundation. Amy, thank you so much for being here finally.
Thank you, and thanks for doing your show.
Yes, I love it. I love doing it. I love sharing wonderful people like you with my audience and the audience in Sylvia Global. Let me first ask you, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I sort of describe myself as a writer and as a feminist activist. And what that means in more practical terms is that I spent the bulk of my 20s creating an organization called the Third Wave Foundation, which was connecting mostly young feminist activists around the country. And through that ended up being often a young feminist voice at Planned Parenthood, at the New York Women's Foundation, at the Ms. Foundation for Women, trying to bring the voices of young people to the tables of the traditional women's movement. And through that experience and those multiple experiences, ended up realizing that I should write some of these stories, not my own story per se, but other people's stories. And so that led me to writing books, and then the books led me to traveling around the country and lecturing on college campuses. And so now I both run my own lecture agency, Soapbox, as well as travel myself to speak on college campuses. And then it's led me to continue to sort of be a voice within the feminist movement, often amplifying the voices, even as I get older, the voices of younger people.
You're so funny. So what is a feminist? How would you describe that term?
I used to default to what the dictionary says, which is that a feminist is someone who believes in the full social, political, and economic equality of all people. And while I think that's a feminist in its most basic form, I think what it means in real terms is that there's something in each of us. It's not always the same thing. It's rarely the same thing that makes us feel insecure. We might feel too rich. We might feel too poor. We might feel too straight. We might feel too gay. We might have a parent that's been in prison. We might feel like our family isn't like other people's that we know. And that drive to divide us on our differences is intentional. It's to disempower us among our differences. And I feel like feminism is trying to disrupt that previous instinct and to say that it's actually our differences that are our strengths, and we need to come together, and we need to not be silenced about those aspects of our lives that we feel quieter about or less public about. And that's why feminism is very much an intersectional movement. You know, it's about your own identity. It's about fighting for the identity of other people and the rights of other people. And what it means in practical terms is both that you start conversations with people and hopefully you follow through with more action. You know, simple little things like I remember being at the gynecologist a couple years ago and they said, "Are you married or single?" And I said, how do gay people feel about filling this out? Because they can't at that time say that they were married, but they might be very much partnered with somebody. I said, why can't you just say married and unmarried? And they're like, well, that's a good question. I guess we could change our form. So feminism in some ways is about pointing out those, especially when you have maybe a power that somebody else doesn't have. And it's also trying to support other people who maybe don't have as ready access to resources to make powerful and informed choices about their lives.
Do you think it's still a frightening term?
Yeah, I think feminism is frightening for both very good reasons, because I think feminism is asking us to live with the uncomfortable moments in life and to change them. And I think that that's hard. I think there's reasons that feminism is difficult that I don't support, because people want to believe more in the stereotypes of feminism than in the reality of feminism. And when people will say to me, oh, but what about all those angry feminists? And I'll say, oh, what feminists are you talking about? And they can't name one. And so we live so much more in sort of an idea of who a feminist is than in the reality of who a feminist is. And I've learned in my years of doing this that I care less how somebody identifies themselves, and I care more about what they're doing in their own life and how they're sort of helping other people, and not necessarily women, but other people sort of on that journey. Are they stepping outside of their own comfort zone, if they have a comfort zone, and making the world a little bit easier for other people, a little bit better?
How did you stumble into this on this path? How did you get here?
When I was in college, there were a number of things that happened that year. It was, you know, it was in the early 90s, late 80s, and there had been the William Kennedy Smith date rape, the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas hearings, the Rodney King verdict in Los Angeles, first the Rodney King incidents and then the Rodney King verdict. And for me personally, I always thought that other people would take care of it for me. I kept sort of witnessing injustice after injustice and thinking, oh, that's so terrible. Somebody's got to do something about that. And it was the Rodney King verdict that was sort of the last straw for me, and came together with a group of people and organized a voter registration drive. And in this moment, went out to what I thought was help underserved communities. We were going to register voters in poor communities across the country. What I realized in trying to, quote, help others is that it does a disservice to me if I live in a country that lives under the illusion of democracy without the reality of democracy. That's just not other people's problems, that's my problem. And so that was sort of what switched my thinking and making me realize that the disservices that are done to other people are a disservice to me, and how can I be part of sort of correcting that.
Wow, do you think that it's changed at all out there in terms of
incrementally?
No, what you said about living in a democracy.
I mean, I never would have thought that gay marriage would have become so popular, and that it would have, been implemented in I can't remember how many states now, 8 states.
Mm-hmm.
That seemed unimaginable 20 years ago. And so I think that change has been because we realize that gay people are our neighbors, our friends, our family members, and we need to ensure that they have the same opportunities that straight people have. And so I see things getting better. That said, I also know that people who feel that power is being taken away from them, and by that I often mean sort of in a traditional sort of masculine hierarchy, then they feel more entitled to sort of claim it. That's why we have all of these white males, who can go on killing sprees and say it's, because the pretty girls didn't like me. There's this sense of, my power has been taken away from me.
So you said something about the poor and the underserved communities that you were trying to get them to sign up to vote, right, after the Rodney King. I feel like the poor and the people that, aren't privileged, that is still very much a reality out there. There's still, would you agree with that? We haven't come as far, I don't feel, in terms of helping poor people and people that are, have disabilities or whatever. I don't think we've come as far with those sort of minorities. Oh,
I absolutely agree. I mean, and it's a long road. I don't know if you saw the recent HBO documentary, Paycheck to Paycheck.
Yes.
Living paycheck to paycheck. Yes. And, here's a young woman.
It depressed me.
Yeah. I was like, here's a young woman who's doing everything right. She has a job. She's found subsidized childcare for her kids. She's got a car that she's trying to make payments on. And she's doing everything she can, and it's still not enough. There still sort of is no way out of that journey. And I think that that's really hard. I think that in the United States, you see this around gender, and you see it around race, and you see it around sexuality, you see it around sort of all of these isms, that our assumption was if we just gave more resources to those who had less resources, that would correct the problem. But we also have to limit the excess. I was having this argument with somebody yesterday who wanted to start a sort of system of more affordable childcare in the United States. And I said, living in New York City, that's a really hard battle, because what you're saying is what you need to really radicalize childcare in this country is you need middle-class people and wealthy people to say no to their private options. It's not just about better funding public options, because otherwise we'll still have a divide between public options and private options.
Right.
We need to actually take the private options and take them off the table. And that is so threatening to people. How dare you come in and take my luxuries away from me? But I think that true reform is going to look like that. And I don't think we're asking for something that doesn't exist in other countries. I mean, if you look at sort of pay caps in other countries, or just the pay gaps and the pay sort of salaries, there's a limit, there's an acknowledgement that excess is excess, and that a person at the top shouldn't be making more than X percent of the person at the bottom. And we've lost those values in the United States. And so the only way that people can make an excessive amount of money is because other people are making a pittance.
That's right. And that scares people because they lose their power.
Mm-hmm.
They feel then they lose their power, and which keeps them and then their people or their offspring or whatever in the same places generation after generation, and doesn't really give other people a chance to move up.
Right.
It's constantly at their expense. That's what I feel growing up. That's what I saw growing up on the south side of Chicago. A question I have for you is something extraordinary that you did was you became an activist. If you feel passionate about something the way you did, the way I do, how do you become an activist? How do you get out there and try to actually evoke change? How did I mean, I think that's can be a hard jump for some people. They feel the passion, they feel the injustice.
Yeah, but how do you translate that? I mean, the one thing is you shouldn't do it alone. That's one of the things, because doing it alone can be really lonely. And I think when you have allies in this work, it makes all the difference. Just somebody to call up at midnight and say, have we thought of this? Did you remember to get the Dixie cups? Whatever it is, from sort of the mundane to the big picture. So don't do it alone. I also think know that you're going to fail. Know that, you're going to you're going to send out a mailing and you're going to forget to put stamps on the letters, and then they're all going to come back to you and you're going to go, I can't believe I did that. You're going to plan a rally and you're going to have been so motivated to do it, but that you do it on Mother's Day and nobody shows up. I mean, you're going to make mistakes along the way. But I think also some of the mistakes that we make within activism is to focus on an ultimate goal that is an unattainable goal. For instance, within feminism, a lot of people say, I want to stop child abuse. Well, that's an amazing goal, but that's a really tough goal. I don't want to say it's an unrealistic goal, but that's a really tough goal. And so instead, why don't you say, I want to take my one block in New York City and assess if there's child abuse happening on my one block, and I want to figure out what is the root cause of that child abuse. Is it poverty? Is it passed on from generation to generation? And how can I sort of help one kid, 2 kids, 3 kids, and then through that realize, like, oh, what we need to stop child abuse is actually we need to create more parenting classes on what it means to be a good parent. And so the way to rescue kids is to rescue their parents. And so I think we need to kind of figure out where the moments of entry are and where we're best suited for that moment of entry. I think so many people either stop themselves because the goal seems so far into the future. I want to stop rapes on college campuses. Well, that's a really, again, admirable goal, really long term. What can you do in the interim to stop rapes on a college campus? Yes, you can do more lights and more whistles, but you can comfort people who are being raped in the interim. You can figure out what would have been different for them, and then you can sort of stop it one by one, and then once you have more of a critical mass, look to sort of bigger solutions.
That was really excellent advice. I do think you're right. You get caught up in a lofty goal, and just a very big goal, and then how do you actually break it down to actually try to, like you said, to translate that? How did you shift from what you were doing trying to get people to vote into sort of like, that was your first sort of activist role, would you say, after the Rodney King riots, and then you sort of switched over more to doing things that dealt more with women's rights and.
Yeah, and I mean, first of all, I think that's also a very common trajectory for people is you often otherize your experience. It's hard as a woman to become at first active on women's rights. It's hard as a gay person to become active on gay rights. It's hard as a black person to become active on civil rights. So sometimes we sort of jump into other social justice movements, ending wars, stopping, abuse against immigrants, stopping hate crimes, and then sort of in the process of that realize that our own group is being oppressed, and how do we sort of bring our own group into that group's agenda. And that's very common, particularly among women. A lot of women become environmentalists, and they become civil rights activists, and they become anti-war groupies, and then they sort of think, oh wait, where's the gender in all of this? So I think that what I did was a part of that. I was looking at people who were not like me and wanting to help them, and realizing, oh wait, I need to be helped too. And then the other thing, I mean, I was both blessed by being, in New York City in a sort of heady time. There was a lot of other people besides me that were having these light bulbs go off. There was the Women's Action Coalition, and there was WHAM, and there were lots of meetings and conferences, and so it was sort of easy to sort of step into those. And being in that very progressive, very motivated, very passionate. ACT UP was happening. They were blocking the tunnels. It was very easy for me to see, okay, what's the missing demographic? And the missing demographic was particularly on young women. And so how can I sort of start with that audience that doesn't seem like it's being served explicitly in any of these other groups? So it was sort of finding out who my audience was. And then it was really responding to needs of people. You know, I had a vision for creating a platform for supporting young women's leadership, but really other people sort of began to dictate to me. Other people would say, I want a membership organization because I want to feel like I belong to something bigger than me. I feel motivated by that. Oh, I want to have meetings because I feel like I don't know enough about what it means to be a feminist. I want to be a part of something that can go national. I want to start in a campaign in New York, and then I want to farm it out across the country. So I feel like a lot of what I was doing was responding thoughtfully, and both with what was in my capability of what other people were sort of saying to me. So once you created the platform, you had lots of people coming and sort of helping to then dictate the next steps.
So you were listening, basically.
Yeah.
You were being a great listener. I mean, the thing about feminism, and why I wanted to talk to you about it, and then I want to get into some of the reproductive rights issues, is that even for me having 5 daughters, you know, the word frightens me. So I love talking to you because I agree with everything you said when you described what it is today. I believe in the dignity of women. And I believe, but when you say feminist or something about it, maybe it was from when I grew up, it scared me into thinking like, being a feminist isn't being feminine.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? That was the connotation that it gave to me. It's like the feminists out there are almost, or I felt, too strong, and being a really strong woman doesn't appear to be very feminine. And I even get caught up as a woman with 5 daughters that I'm trying to raise to be strong people, get caught up in those stereotypes.
Right. Well, because I do think that some of feminism itself was confused, and I think
Yes.
the only power that we saw and that felt familiar to us was male power. And so the only way to be a woman and to be powerful was to be more masculine. And it wasn't that that was ultimately the goal of feminism, but I think there was this sense of what we were asking for was inclusion, success, respect, but what we were sort of we wanted in, but what we wanted into was something that was more male. And so there was this assumption that then to access that meant to deny that we were feminine. I think obviously 40, 50 years into a very strong, vibrant feminist movement, that's obviously no longer the case. And I think that what we've realized is that females have their own power and their own way of doing things, you know, not exclusively, but that we should bring that experience into those situations, not merely bring ourselves into those situations, not bring a body into the room, but bringing a way of thinking into the room. You know, I think that there was an assumption that, oh, we just want women. We just want people to sort of fill these roles. And in fact, we want a female way of doing things to better inform this. I mean, you talk to a lot of companies, and they know they don't want women because they want females to take over Google as engineers, for instance. They want women to work at Google because they need a diverse workforce, because they're creating products for a diverse community and a diverse world. And they need more people sort of weighing in on what those products will be. So having a female experience is a priority. Having a female voice is a priority within those settings. Whereas it used to just be, oh, we want women for women's sake. We want women to sort of take over these positions of leadership. I also think that within feminism femininity is correlated with weakness, and masculinity is correlated with strength. You know, you throw like a girl means like you're a bad thrower. And, you know, you'll hear to girls they'll say toughen up. It's like essentially the messages that we cue up are be more like a boy if you want to be respected. You know, take yourself seriously. You know, don't underestimate your intellect. And that's been comfortable for some women but uncomfortable for others. And I think that luckily over the last 15, 20 years we've realized that there are women who are very comfortable being feminine, and there are women who are not comfortable being feminine. There are men who are more comfortable with masculinity, and others who are uncomfortable with masculinity. And so we can play with those roles a little bit more. I was having a conversation with somebody this morning about transgenderism. There's been a lot of profiles, and there was a big New York Times style section piece about Janet Mock and another woman who stars on Orange is the New Black, but all of them are male to female transgender. There's no one that was profiled that's female to male. And I said that's because you can be feminine enough, but those women will never be masculine enough. And so they're not yet valued as men because masculinity is too cherished. Whereas femininity, it's more for grabs. Anybody can sort of take it because it's still sort of seen as the weaker of the two. But it's a long, process. I struggled with it too. I struggled with it more because I lived in Portland, Oregon for a year. And I say in Portland, it was just, fashion was not a priority there. It was sort of like, why didn't you hand knit that hemp sweater you're wearing? And how dare you, why did you shave your legs? And why do you wear perfume? And why? So it was interesting because that was not a gender, it was just an aesthetic that was very anti-consumerism. And that it was tough for me to live there. It wasn't about gender, it was about the things that I felt like made me who I am. I couldn't fully, indulge.
Well, you worked on a couple documentaries, right? One of them was about Gloria Steinem.
Yep.
That's correct. And she was obviously major in the feminist movement. And do you think that, how do you think that she has evolved? I think she's evolved.
Yeah, no, I don't know, though, because if you actually, in the Gloria documentary, if you go back and look at these clips of her when she was, 28 years old and going to an abortion speak out or covering a magazine article, she was still this soft-spoken, sort of, unassuming person. In some ways, I mean, and it was interesting during the documentary, is she was the same person back then that she is now. And she actually wrote a popular article called "Women Get More Radical with Age." And if anything, I think that people might assume her to be more, less active now or less vocal or less angry, whatever it is. But I actually just think that that was their assumption of who older women are, and they assume older women are less out there and less less angry. But I think she's in some ways is the same person, and she's wickedly smart. She's incredibly smart, and she can sort of dissect anything. She's also an incredibly compassionate person. And yes, I do think maybe the media portrayed certain aspects of her that didn't always highlight those. She's also incredibly witty. But I think at the same time is sort of who she always was. And if anything, I think she's becoming more radical, as she would say, with age.
That's fascinating because I fell for it completely because I thought, wow, she seems softer to me and she seems more compassionate, and therefore but maybe just over time I've gotten more comfortable with her message.
Yeah, it's maybe we change more than other people change.
Yes.
I was just saying, I don't know if you saw this article about Somali Mom in Newsweek, and she has been a great activist on sex trafficking, and there's now all these accusations that she exploited people's stories. And I was in a meeting last night, and I said, obviously you shouldn't lie, you shouldn't exaggerate, you shouldn't exploit other people's stories. And I said, but sometimes we as voyeurs to these experiences, we don't pay attention unless they're extreme. We're only going to perk up when it was an extreme rape in a back alley. If somebody was drunk at a party, we're like, well, didn't she know better? Why was she there? Whereas it was extreme, it's so clear to us. And so I do think that we bring our own biases to people and to experiences. And so some of it is, as you said, more of a reflection of how we change and how we grow.
No, we absolutely do. And sort of I'm seeing that in the conversation that we're having now. In terms of the conversation about, though, which just gets so politicized, and I hate the language that's used in it, reproductive rights.
Yeah.
A big one, as I told you, again, I've evolved. I feel like I'm evolving still. Why do you think, I saw your interview with Bill O'Reilly, I thought it almost made me cry, because I thought he was awful to you. Because I think there's really excellent points on both sides, except I think that the language around it could be so much more progressive than it is. I mean, all the people involved on both sides there's some really smart people, really wise people on both sides of that argument, and I'm not seeing why we're not getting a little bit further along. Do you know what I mean? Why we're not sort of finding common ground, which is why I love it. But why do you think that is, and why do you think there's such a demonization of, of people who are, let's say, pro-choice.
Well, Carol Gilligan wrote this wonderful book in the late 70s.
I know of her.
Yeah, In a Different Voice. And many people talk about it being a book about girls' voices and girls' experiences, but it's actually a book about women's power and how with Roe v. Wade, which passed in 1973, which was both giving women the right to choose an abortion up to a certain point in the pregnancy, up to 28 weeks in pregnancy, but it was also giving women the right to choose pregnancy. It was giving women rights over both terminating and continuing pregnancy. It was giving pregnancy rights to a woman, which was very radical. And a lot of people obviously interpret Roe v. Wade as being exclusively about the right to terminate a pregnancy, but it's also about having the right to continue a pregnancy and that being a woman's right. And it's interesting because what Carol Gilligan was sort of saying in A Different Voice is that she didn't see women actualizing that power, that was an incredible power to give to women, and women were still defaulting to the state and defaulting their husbands and defaulting to sort of societal norms and not owning that power that had been given to them. And I think that's, that is the positive sort of side of this is what can happen when women take control. But the negative is that I think women, that giving that power to women is very threatening, and people don't want women to have that power over our future, and that is essentially what it is. And so people naturally want to take that power away from women. I also think that we're not often debating about abortion meaning a procedure that empties the contents of your uterus. We're often debating about a woman's selfishness and who deserves that right and who does not deserve that right. And so it's not often the procedure, because if you are a very middle-class person and you choose to have an abortion, you're selfish. How dare you? If you're a poor woman and you have 3 abortions, why do you keep getting pregnant? We're not faulting you for having the abortion. We're just sort of, why do you keep getting pregnant? And so we, in this country, we have a history of sterilizing poor women, of sterilizing black women, and we have a history of, women who are, with in vitro fertilization are trying again and again and again to get pregnant, and with that, attempt to overproduce is lots of abortions. But we don't fault them because they're trying to have a baby. How can we take that right away from them? They're trying desperately to be mothers. And so I think that the conversation, we keep it focused on abortion because that's an easier, more gruesome, more horrific thing to focus on. But in fact, I think that what we're debating is how dare you, in some instances, have that right, and in other instances, we want to sort of impose that right onto other people. I mean, traveling globally around this country, it's fascinating. The Catholic Church is as strong as it can be in China. They have some presence in India. And in both those countries, abortion is practically mandated. And there's because those are Chinese and Indian babies. And it sort of is like, oh, you're right, we have to curtail population. And so when there is a motivation that is bigger and more national, it doesn't somehow, the abortion politics don't rear their head. I mean, I think it's as wrong to require somebody to have abortion as it is to deny somebody an abortion. I just want to be clear. But I do think that it is interesting how it plays out on a global scale. But I do think, to your point, I think most people find abortion a really unfortunate reality. I think most people find abortion something they don't want people to have to go through. They find it murder, there's a range of things, and yet I think many people, regardless of their personal opinions, if they feel desperate enough, they're still going to have an abortion. And personally, when I see people weighing the choice to have an abortion, they're not often debating, can I go through with this procedure? They're debating, am I in a safe relationship right now? Do I have as much money as I think I should in order to be raising a child? Am I ready to be a mother right now? Like, I can't believe this happened to me. Do I have enough security in my life, to be able to sort of see this pregnancy through? So it's not often, can I do this termination? It's, am I ready to be a good enough mother right now? And I think that feeds into sort of also this social pressure of what does it mean to be a mother, and who's a good mother, and who's allowed to be a mother, who can own that title more readily than other people. And so I think that we can't deal fully with abortion without fully dealing with our expectations of motherhood and it being this supreme, beautiful experience, because it's not for everybody. And we have to also sort of expose those aspects of motherhood in order to better sort of understand why abortion is not always the worst decision for some people. For some people, it's an incredibly empowering experience, not having an abortion, but being child-free at that point in their lives. And we don't have enough moments to be honest about it, about this murky period, because the people who drive the debate are either providers and the Planned Parenthoods of the world, or they're the people opposing it. And so the debates are taken over by the two people who hold the most extreme perspectives. But in fact, the reality of us are all in the middle. I mean, the pre-Roe v. Wade, meaning when abortion was illegal in this country, and the post-Roe v. Wade, the same number of women have abortions. So it wasn't that legal or illegal did much, it just meant that we were having them legally.
Maybe safer, right?
Yeah, and safer, and yes, absolutely. And, if you look at the statistics, and the Center for Reproductive Rights does great statistics on this, Catholic women are more likely to have abortions than any other religious affiliated group. But they say that's because of a lack of birth control, of lack of dependence on birth control. And so I do think, and abortion providers talk all the time about working in a clinic and having one of their protesters come in and have to get an abortion, and how they're going to provide that for them. That's what they do as providers, but it is hard. You watch somebody walk in that had been protesting you and will go back out tomorrow and protest you again because they see their right as totally different as somebody else's rights.
Oh, that's very disturbing to me. I think what's lacking in this also is support for the woman, like you said, sort of, about to make that decision. Because it's not always, it is so much about motherhood. It's actually a very thoughtful decision in some ways, because you're saying to yourself, if you take it seriously, I know I've got to see this child's life through. Can I do that right now? Can I see that life through? I mean, I think that it is speaking a lot to us about, at that time when you're in the flux of that decision, I think there's so much, anger coming at you from the one side and judgment, and sometimes not enough just support and love and compassion so someone can really think that through. I think what's happening with the pro-life group, honestly, is if they could get their act together, if that's what they really wanted to do, was have abortion be like, let's say, have it be less, then they would be more thoughtful about, like what you were saying, about motherhood, about, maybe birth control and things of that. I think a lot of what my conversation with Louisa Cabal was about, who was at the Center for Reproductive Rights, was about a woman's dignity. Having a woman have her dignity. It's not only about terminating, a potential life, because I do believe, and even the doctors who perform.
Yeah, I mean, you can't deny that, and
right. That's not the point, though. Actually,
yeah,
that's sort of not the point. It is the point, and it's not the point. I think that we're not really progressing in the conversation, and when you talk to someone like you, and you actually give, I shouldn't say like you, that was awful, actually. When you talk to someone who has your opinion about it, and has an opinion about it, and is for reproductive rights wholeheartedly, you see that they're very intellectual, thoughtful, kind, and loving people. I bet you're an excellent mother. It's got nothing to do, I think I'm an excellent mother. Maybe I probably shouldn't have 8 children, but I think I'm an excellent mother. And I think that you have to be thoughtful about your bringing a life into this world and what that means. Because it doesn't, Thomas Friedman wrote a great article, it doesn't end once you give birth.
Oh, yeah.
He would say, well, okay, those people are saying protect the life inside the womb, but you've got to protect the life outside the womb. There are things we need to do if we're going to bring those children into the world. Do you sort of agree, or do you see that?
No, I agree. I totally agree, and I think there's not enough support, for women. But I also think there's a reality that some women don't want to be mothers, which I feel like also doesn't. I believe in the beauty of motherhood and the power of motherhood, and in my own personal experience, I know that to be true. But sort of bigger than me, I really believe in that. But I also don't want women to feel beholden to being mothers who don't want to be mothers. And I think there are some women who know that about themselves, know that they don't want to be mothers. I also know women who choose motherhood because they'll be too penalized if they don't, but they don't necessarily want to be mothers.
So you're saying it's about the role of women in society, our expectations for women in society. Are they more than just people who can procreate, which you're right, is a huge empowering thing that we can do, that we can own.
And it is tied up because I do think that we become too dependent upon women's power being through their life-giving capability and their ability to be mothers. And again, I'm not denying that to women because I think that is really powerful, but I think that we depend upon it too much. And we depend upon it too much deliberately because it is deliberately keeping women's responsibility siloed to that one role. And as long as we become over-dependent on women being mothers, we can't depend upon them to be as crucial to the rest of society. We see them as crucial to being mothers, but not as crucial to sort of the development of the world. We see them just to the development of our offspring, not to a larger culture. But I do think that people, I think more people than not are very thoughtful about this issue, and I think more people than not realize it's a very complicated issue, and I have as many friends who say that motherhood, after they became mothers, they could never choose to have an abortion, as friends who said, now that I'm a mother, I realize what a responsibility is, and I'm so much stronger of an advocate for abortion because I don't think anybody should take this decision lightly. And so I can sort of see both sides of it. I would say I have anecdotally as many examples on both sides. And I think that I think we ourselves end up dividing based on assumptions around feelings, not on reality. I mean, you hear people all the time say, are you pro-choice or are you pro-life? And the fact is most people are somewhere in between, I want you to have choices, absolutely, but I also want you to feel supported, in whatever choice that is. It's like having a choice isn't often enough. You need to have the support behind it. And then pro-life, I think we're all pro-life. I mean, there was a great book done years and years and years ago. I can't remember the name of it, but it was a woman who looked at every state, and she looked at the pro-child policies in those states. What was the amount of money given to early childhood medical, early childhood development, free school lunch programs, reading interventions, sort of all of these pro-child policies, and compared it to a state's pro-choice policies. At how many abortion restrictions were there any? And consistently, the most pro-choice states, meaning the states with the most lenient abortion rights, were consistently the most pro-child states, the ones that put the most support into programming for children. And so to me, and then conversely, the ones who had the most restricted had the least amount of funding. And so to me, I thought, well, and I mean, that's my side of the argument, and so I was happy to sort of have that confirmation. But I think that the two can coexist. You can be pro-choice, and that can be part of your very pro-child politics, because it's about having children that are wanted, having children that are desired, having children that are going to be brought up under safe circumstances, which does not necessarily mean wealthy circumstances at all, but I think it's choosing children that can be brought into this world in a way that is going to be more comfortable for them than ways that are going to be.
So they can thrive. I mean, we want them to thrive, right? And it's interesting that another reason why I love talking to you and love talking to Louisa is you make me think about myself and my own stereotypes, because you're right. When you say about being a mother, if someone decided, if I had a friend who said, I've just chosen to not be a mother, it's not something I really want to do, or if one of my daughters said that to me later on, I think I'd be like, why not?
Yeah.
So you're right. It's not really fair of me. I mean, that's not, not everyone probably wants to be a mother, and not everyone has to be a mother for sure. Right. And why would I, because they're a woman and they have that capability to bring life into the world, which is empowering and beautiful, that doesn't mean they should or they have to. Be that freedom of choice, even before we get into whether or not you're going to terminate a pregnancy. I mean, maybe you just never want to even go there at all. And that's okay, and I shouldn't think like, I suppose I have to look at myself and say, why would I wonder? It'd be like, that's like saying, why would I wonder why someone would be different than me? And people are different than me. And that's, I hate that about myself. What I love is that these conversations bring to light even my own sort of preconceived notions about a woman and what a woman should do and the role that I think a woman should play, and trying to be more aware of that and conscious of that as I'm raising my daughters, so I don't automatically put them in a box. I feel a tremendous responsibility. I want to ask you about your, you have an organization, the Third Wave. Can you tell me about that?
Well, I'm not as involved in Third Wave as I once was, just because as I get older, and Third Wave's target population is women, right, between the ages of 15 and 30. But Third Wave both is a sort of strictly regranting organization, and so Third Wave raises money and then gives money to support programming that is for that demographic and led by that demographic. I mean, that was one of the sort of gaps that Third Wave kept identifying, is that girls were a constituency, girls and boys were a constituency, women were a constituency, but young women were not a constituency. And those years between 15 and 30 are the most identity-informing years that one goes through. And so there should be support, particularly in that demographic of life, in that moment of life, that transition in life. And so Third Wave looks for programs that are in that. Third Wave also gives a lot of networking opportunities. Third Wave, just in the way it's structured in terms of how it's board and staffing, gives incredible leadership opportunities to young women and men who sort of have worked with Third Wave and been a part of the leadership of Third Wave. Third Wave also has done a conference for several years called Making Money, Make Change, and it's about disrupting the flow of philanthropy and trying to ensure that, again, that young people have a voice in how philanthropic dollars are sort of dispersed, and particularly those individuals who are coming into those massive amounts of wealth, either inherited or their earned wealth, and how can they be decision makers in their philanthropy on areas that speak more personally to them. How can they sort of find those areas that they care about? Third Wave has also run an abortion hotline, and so it does fund women to get abortions, and it works. There's something called the National Network of Abortion Funds that exists in many states, though not all states. And so Third Wave prioritizes only funding in states where an abortion fund doesn't exist. So it will fund in states, I can't remember what they are right now, but that do not have a pre-existing fund to help poor women access abortion. And through that, we've heard just horrific, horrific stories. And there are some states, for instance, Michigan, that denies public funding for abortion. There's a woman who was 6 months pregnant and her fetus died, and she wanted the procedure to get whether it's a live fetus or a dead fetus out of your baby is technically an abortion. And the Medicaid funding would not fund the abortion, and the woman couldn't pay for it. And the doctors kept saying to her, you have to wait for it to naturally expunge. That's the only way, because you can't, or if you want to pay for it privately. So Third Wave raised money to pay for this woman to abort her dead fetus. And that's sort of an example of some of the extreme stories that we had sort of heard across the country. And there have been other ones like that. That was not a unique experience. Rare for sure, but not unique. Third Wave now it's sort of is trying to prioritize a lot of philanthropy in this country is very concentrated, as you can imagine, sort of on the coast and in the big cities. And Third Wave is really trying to focus on rural communities and the issues of those communities, and particularly as they affect a younger demographic. And it's often, access to higher education, access to better paying jobs. We talked about paycheck to paycheck. How do you sort of access jobs that not only pay you, but pay you fairly and pay you in a living wage? And so it's in a little bit of a transition right now. So there's how I would describe it in 6 months from now might sound totally different.
So how involved are you with it?
I'm not involved at all. I'd been on the founding. I was a founder. I was in the founding board, and I'd been a board member for 10 years. And now I'm just more kept up to date on what's happening. I still support Third Wave. I still act as sort of a cheerleader and champion for them, but I don't have any direct day-to-day involvement.
And the documentaries then are more recent. So where are you putting your time and energies right now?
I put a lot of time and energy into Soapbox, which is a company I created that's a lecture agency. But through Soapbox, we also run these feminist camps that are week-long immersions in feminism, and every day will be a different theme: philanthropy, violence, religion, media, and it often attracts anywhere between 12 to 20 college, undergraduate, and graduate students, sometimes very unaffiliated students who've been out a number of years, returning students, to come together and in New York City for a week-long of programming around these themes within feminism. And though they learn tons, they're pushed theoretically, they're pushed personally, I would say the biggest strength of the program is the networking that happens among the women that are there, that they leave and sort of feel invigorated in their communities and to go back into their communities. I think many of them come thinking, oh, I want to move to New York, and then they leave and think, no, I just want to be a better feminist in my community. So I do those, and then I've been deeply involved in Makers, which is a documentary that aired on PBS about a year and a half ago called Makers, Women Making America. And then this fall, there's 6 one-hour series coming out on PBS, Women in Space, Women in Comedy, and they'll sort of roll out on PBS. And I've been helping with education and sort of other just sort of networking, various networking things around Makers.
Oh, so are you producing Makers?
I'm not a producer on Makers. I'm the director of educational outreach and content, and I was a consultant on the sort of initial iteration of Makers, which was sort of getting it to the point of broadcast. And we're going to be relaunching our advisory board, and I'll be chairing the advisory board.
How was that received? What was the feedback you got about that?
It was great. I mean, people who sort of work more day-to-day within feminism thought, it's too white, you forgot to cover this person, why didn't you do that? But I would say overwhelmingly there wasn't one consistent complaint, which means that I think it did a really good job of presenting fairly and accurately the women's movement as it were the last 50 years in America.
And as you get these girls to get women or is it girls that you're getting together for the week-long
mostly young women that are college students, college graduates, and undergraduates.
So not young girls that are still in high school.
Right. Yeah.
And so that is just very satisfying. This is still it's evolving. Yeah. So it's extremely satisfying work for you.
Yes. I mean, just being around young people is satisfying, you know.
Well, you're not old yet.
No, I know, but it is inspiring to be around young people.
So your most recent book, I'd like to hear just a little bit about your most recent book that I sort of mentioned to you earlier before the show started. The most recent book you wrote about parenting.
Yes. The last book I wrote was called Opting In, Having a Child Without Losing Yourself. And the main goal of that book was getting mothers in particular to sort of own their own way of parenting unique in their own lives. And the sort of lead up to the book was a sort of depressing realization that in feminism's quest to sort of present women with more options actually left women feeling more limited, that either you could be a good woman by being a good mother, or you could be a good feminist by being a power career woman. And so in this generation, you not only were failing society for not being a good woman, you were failing feminism for not being a good enough feminist. And so rather than replacing one structure with another structure, it just ended up having 2 extremes, which gets into, I think, a larger problem that we have in society, and particularly within females, is that women's success is based on a standard of excellence that is actually unachievable for most people. And men can live under a standard of good enough, and women have to live under a standard of excellent. If you look at the women that we single out as being examples for young girls, it's Oprah, it's Katie Couric, it's a lot of first, it's a lot of best, it's a lot of most, it's a lot of millionaires and billionaires and be this. And men get a lot of credit for just doing a really good job at their job. And so how can we sort of equalize that? So I was sort of looking at more women's identity, but I was looking at it through the lens of motherhood and looking at very strong, very confident women who were defaulting to a societal norm at the expense of their own instincts. And I found that very sad for a generation of women raised within feminism. I would hear women say, oh, well, it's just my doctor told me I had to go to bed every night at 11, or my doctor told me I was supposed to drink 8 glasses of orange juice a week, or my doctor told me I was supposed to sit down every opportunity I had. And you'd say, really, why are you living? Or when you had a child, oh, my doctor told me I had to do this. There's one way of doing things. And what I saw it being symptomatic of was a generation of women who were not confident in their own abilities. And so they had to default constantly. You know, they had to give up what were their own instincts in the favor of what seemed like a sanctioned advice, you know, or what seemed like a professional opinion, rather than trusting what they knew to be true. It had to be this sort of authority voice coming in because their voices weren't authoritarian. So it was looking at women's sort of lack of confidence, particularly around motherhood, and how motherhood for many women became the one moment for women to sort of ask to take up space. Oh, honey, can we please do this? Or please, I want to do this. Or can I have that seat on the subway? I'm pregnant. And so I saw a lot of women claiming attention, claiming space, claiming comforts that they would never have otherwise asked for, but only did it through the guise of the fact that they were pregnant. And I found that very sad, that women couldn't feel like they could take up that same space
Even if they were
They
pregnant.
could only take up that space as mothers.
How have you found it for you personally to balance this amazing career you have as being an activist and a writer and pushing the feminist movement forward in a very, a profound way, and then also you're a mom, you have two boys.
Yeah, I mean, I have a wonderful partner, husband that helps me with everything, and we really do share parenting. I mean, I might think about parenting more, but I would say when it comes to the day-to-day, we really do have our hands equally in it. Our kids are older now, they're 8 and 10, so it's more, okay, you take over from the babysitter this hour, I'll take over from this hour, so there's a little bit more that makes it able to be equal. I think when you're in the trenches of it, and if breastfeeding, if you go that route, and there's other, it's harder to be truly equal in some ways. But that's, I would say, one of the main things. And also, I really, I try to both be very present for my kids when I'm with my kids, and also try to make sure they know that I really love what I do, and I really love my job. And my not being here is not because I love my job more than I love them, but it keeps me happy and keeps me sane. And the more I can enjoy my job, the more I can then leave time to enjoy my time with them. And so, I mean, it's not, it's more of a logistical hurdle than it is an emotional hurdle. And some days I just, I wake up and I'm like, oh, I have to text this babysitter, and I have to text that babysitter. But you kind of, there's logistical things that every mom deals with or every parent deals with. But I always likened being a stay-at-home parent for me to be a take-home test, right? I thought, well, if I'm a stay-at-home parent, there's no reason why my kids shouldn't be perfect. If I'm working, they're allowed to have flaws. There's a way that I can mess up because there's another excuse on the table. I was raised by a working mother, and so not working was just never an option for me, because that was just what I grew up as my norm, was seeing women work.
So, but has that part of your life still been satisfying for you and what you thought it would be? The mother aspect.
Oh, yeah. No, I love being a mother. I love the relationship I have with my kids. I love when we're a family of 4 and we do things together. I really miss the family time, if I'm out. And, I make a point of not being out more than 2 nights a week, because it's just hard for me emotionally to not be there for sharing that family time and being there for my kids. And, it's balancing it, because if I was there too much, I think I would resent it, but I'm there just enough that it feels chosen and it feels wanted and it feels desired.
Do you think that we're progressing in that way for women who sort of choose both?
Yeah, I think things have gotten better. I still think there's a lot of deceit that goes on around it. I hear a lot of women, who say, oh, I've got this, or, it's still tough. And there's some workplaces that are intentionally making it tough on parents. And there are others that recognize that the majority of their workforce is parents or will be parents, and they have to provide a working environment that works for them. A lot of these long hours are not totally necessary. I have a lot of friends that work in they're corporate lawyers, or they work in finance, and they might be at work till 9, but they've also gone to the gym for an hour and gone out to dinner for an hour in that time. And I thought, well, you could leave at 7 and then just do the gym time at another time. So, and there's a lot of time, and I've been in these corporate offices where they're going out to get their shoes shined in the middle of the day, and they're going out to a dentist, they're doing, so I don't think that the workforce has to be as prohibitive in terms of its hours as it is. I think there's and I think workplaces are coming around on that realization. It is still tough. There's certain professions that can't give as much as others.
No, and so opting in was about, when you say not losing yourself, what did you sort of mean by that for the woman who's reading that book? And now I need to definitely read that book. Without having children, without losing yourself. You mean that you see that too many women they're just not doing any. Yeah, go ahead.
I think they lost themselves in this concept of motherhood. That they felt that being a mother had to come at the expense of them being their own person.
Yes.
Once you became a mother, you weren't able to also be.
You have no other identity once you're a mother. That is your soul. Okay. So. And in the book, did you show that? It's so funny you say that, because I think that makes you really resentful toward your children. It can make you very resentful toward your children when you only have that identity as being their mother. I think my mother resented that, having 9 children, and I see that I need that more of a balance is required.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, and I see that. I have friends whose mothers, quote, didn't work, and as you get along in life, it's hard to find out what value they had, and then it's hard, and then you internalize that lack of value. As your children need you less and less, well, then what's your job? So what are you supposed to do? And then you resent your kids for growing up, and I mean, it's a very tough battle. I don't necessarily mean that people have to work for pay or people have to work. I do think that you have to find something of value that is your contribution to the world beyond your children and your family. And I think that is sort of the most satisfied people I know are people who find that balance of sort of living in a way that can both support their family life and then and feel that they're giving back to something beyond that's bigger than themselves.
No, I totally agree. Okay, so I'm probably going to end it about there, except I wanted to ask you one last thing. So the next sort of thing that you have going, you're going to continue on with Soapbox, and then in the fall, you're going to be working on the PBS.
Yes.
Will it air this fall, or will we be working on it this fall?
No, the films they're almost all done, and they'll be airing in the fall, and then we'll be distributing them. They'll be on PBS, and then I'll be working with schools all across the country, and education, Google, with Skype in the classroom, with Facing History and Ourselves, with a lot of sort of educational partners to make sure that the films are seen by
high schools?
Audiences.
It's going to be high schools or colleges?
Both high schools and colleges, and even middle schools. The original film had a lot of popularity among middle schools. It's great.
I just think, Amy, that the work you're doing is so important. I was so excited to have you on the show, so excited to tell my daughters about you, and so excited in the way that after reading about you and then talking to you today, because you're so eloquent and articulate, that it's still changing me. I mean, I guess that means that even at 45, I can still grow up a little bit and, be a little more open-minded. I've never wanted to be the kind of person that just got so stuck in one view of, or even just what I thought about feminism, as I said earlier, or how I see some people talking about some of these terms and, the negative connotation that goes with it. I think that that's not going to serve our daughters well in the next generation at all.
And that's why your show is so great. The more we can have opportunities to converse and share and be human with each other, the more range of opinions we get, and I think the more the issues become more understandable to us to have our own opinions and to insert ourselves into it.
Yes, and the more compassion we have for people that don't necessarily view everything the way that we do, and that's okay. Yeah. I mean, I could have had this conversation with you 1 year ago, and it could have been a very different conversation. In that 1 year, I had experiences that opened me up and opened up the way I view the world, the way I think about feminism. And really, it's true. Feminism probably hasn't changed that much. It's probably me that's changed.
Yeah.
And that's probably a really good thing, and a really great thing.
But yes.
Yeah, it's still going. It's still progressing. Feminism is still, I think, progressing. And I'm not as afraid to talk about it with my girls and have that conversation with other women who are like me, mostly stay-at-home moms. It can't be like we're pitted against each other, I think, way too much.
Right.
Where we need to come together, which is why I really wanted to have this wonderful conversation with you. And I know that Jackie, adores you. Another common person we have who is just superior, right? And being able to do both. Being able to be a true activist and a lovely human being and a terrific mom, a terrific ambassador. Yeah, no, you're an ambassador for this, and I think that I hope that people get the message of how they can sort of reach out in a grassroots way, and if they feel passionate about something, how they can begin activism, making that leap.
Great. Well, thank you for contributing, and thank you for having me to the conversation. And I feel like we'll continue to talk.
All right.
Thank you. Okay, take care. Okay.
All right.
Bye.